Feather the Redeemed versus Nekusar the Mindrazer. I quite like that hand. We can go in for Cold Steel Heart on turn 2. And hopefully if we get into a land, then we can go Feather into some Sprint and start getting some fast commander damage on our opponent. Feather the Redeemed is a 3-mana Boros commander with flying. It's a 3/4. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery that targets a creature you control, you get it back into your hand at the next end step. We'll just go in for the Battlefield Forge and pass it straight over. Got into Ephemeral Shields. And a Sol Ring from our opponent, which is going to accelerate them quite a bit past us, and that's Anvil of Bolgarden. Players have no max hand size at the beginning of each player's draw step. That player draws an additional card, then discards a card. And this is exactly what the typical Nekusar deck does. They want us to be drawing and discarding, because whenever we draw, it will deal 1 damage to us. They have multiple effects like this in Nekusar. And Nekusar the Mindrazer has us draw an additional card at the beginning of the turn as well. 5 mana in Grixis for a 2/4. Well, we've got the Pearl Medallion there. Let's just ditch the Mirror Wing. We've got Zada in hand, so we'll just go in for Cold Steel Heart. And we still haven't gotten into a land, so at least our opponent's helping us dig into the deck to get closer to that. We need double white for Feather, so we'll have the Cold Steel Heart give us white. And it might be worth doing a bit of setting up with the Pearl Medallion actually, because that will make spells like the Shields, Double Cleave and Open the Armory cost a single white instead of 2. Next turn our opponent is on Nekusar mana, and we don't have any means of dealing with it. But I think it's just a case of trying to outrace our opponent. If they're going to give us lots of card draw, then we don't necessarily have to rely on the card draw of our own. Wow, and we still haven't gotten into another land. Are we going to bother with Zada this game? Yeah, I think we just get rid of Zada here, and I'm going to actually go in for the Pearl Medallion in the hope that we get into a land next turn. And that way, we've got a bunch of single mana spells in hand. And if our opponent gets rid of the Feather, manages to get rid of Feather, then we will be able to recast it the turn after, because Pearl Medallion will make it cost 1 generic less to cast. But we should be able to protect Feather okay if we hold up the Ephemeral Shields. Gives our commander indestructible. Oh, and there's a Locust God. A Champion's Helm is good as well. Wow, there are no lands in this deck apparently. Yeah, I think we're going to have to rely on the Champion's Helm, so let's get rid of Open the Armory. And then it's Champion's Helm. And yet again, hoping for a mana next turn. We can equip the Champion's Helm to our commander that way. And then we might actually be able to swing in against the Locust God. Not completely against, our opponent wheeling us here. And they're setting up with a Limdor's Vault. This basically lets you look at the top 5 cards of your library and reorganise them any number of times. For each time you activate that effect again, you have to pay a life, and the 5 cards you just looked at go on the bottom. Our opponent's only got 1 card left in hand, so I imagine they're aiming for a wheel. And because they've got so much life, they're probably able to just keep going until they hit Wheel of Fortune. They can afford it thanks to the Command Tower and Sol Ring. They've drawn and discarded the Wheel and Deal. And then playing a Bojuka Bog to exile our graveyard. We don't care about that. And I have to imagine they went for the Wheel effect off the top with Limdor's Vault. Which is, yeah, that's exactly what it was. Wheel of Fortune, and every time they draw a card, the Locust God will give them some Flying Haste insects. And they obviously get to refill their hand as well. We were still a couple of cards away from getting into another land. And the Feast and Famine isn't really going to help us. I think we are pretty much done here. because unfortunately didn't get into a board wipe in all of that. Yeah, and the Sunforger might have to come out of this deck. It's too slow in 1 versus 1, I think. It's much better in multiplayer. Let's just discard that, actually. And finally, managing to get down our commander, but it's too little too late. We will put the Champion's Helm onto Feather. We've just been mana screwed this game for some reason, not getting into lands. But we have a 5/6, so that should keep the Locust God from swinging in. But I imagine they've got a bunch more draw pain effects in hand. Getting into a time spiral, and that will shuffle Graveyard and Hand into the library and draw a fresh 7. Which obviously gives our opponent 7 more insects, and this is turned into a Locust God deck, really. Played Locust God on the channel, and it's a really good commander, but it's very linear. It just plays out exactly the same way every single game as we are seeing here. It's just get the Locust God out, wheel a bunch of times and go wide on your opponent. And our opponent here is just trying to make as many insects as they can. The Whirlpool Warrior, when it enters the battlefield, shuffle cards from your hand into your library and draw that many. So they got some more card draw for the Locust God there. And then for 3 and sacrificing it, each player shuffles cards from their hand into their library and draws that many, so that is more card draw. And then just going in with everything and hitting us for lethal, down to -15. We'll see if we can get another game on the go, and we'll see if we can draw into lands this time. Feather the Redeemed versus Yidris, Maelstrom Wielder. I'm quite liking that hand. We can get an equipment. We've got our 2 white sources and a red source. Definitely going to keep that. Just lead off with Swords to Plowshares mana. Highly doubt we're going to be using that, although I'm not above using it on a Birds of Paradise, actually. Yidris Maelstrom Wielder is 4 mana, every colour except white. It's a 5/4 trample, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, as you cast spells from your hand this turn, they gain Cascade. Well, the Swiftfoot Boots is nice, but let's get in for the Fire Diamond here. We need our red source, and we just need to keep our fingers crossed that our opponent doesn't have any artifact removal. Feather the Redeemed is a 3/4 flyer. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery that targets a creature you control, you get it back into your hand at the beginning of the next end step. A plateau is really good. I think... well, we can get down Feather again next turn, so if they've got removal, they can do it in response to a Swiftfoot Boots anyway. I was just thinking of getting Swiftfoot Boots down and then Feather and equip next turn. But they can use instant speed removal in response to a Boots anyway. So if they've got removal, we might as well try and get it out of their hand. And it's noteworthy that if they had a Song of the Dryads or a Lignify, something like that, a pacifism effect, we could Swords to Plowshares the Feather, and it would go back into the command zone, but the Swords to Plowshares would come back into our hand, so we'd just gain some free life there, and keep it from being enchanted. Alright, an Ancient Tomb is useful. I was actually just debating taking this out, but it is in here for things like equipments. This is quite a colour heavy deck. Yeah, so we'll go for Boots, and then it's Open the Armory next turn maybe. That'll be 1/2 for Open the Armory, and then 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2 equip for the Sword of Feast and Famine. Yeah, so let's go for the Boros Charm now. We'll put Double Strike on Feather, start to get some commander damage in. Now, unfortunately, can't hold up the Boros Charm to save Feather from any board wipes. But we can easily afford to recast Feather and get the Swiftfoot Boots onto her again, so I'm not too worried about getting a board wipe out of our opponent's hand. It'd be nice if this was Path to Exile, actually, because what we could do in response to a board wipe is exile Feather and put her in the command zone and then get some ramp on the go. And we'd still be left with a Path to Exile at the end of the turn. But Path might be going on Yidris here. If they go for it on turn 4, which they are, I think we absolutely go for Path onto Yidris. And fingers crossed they don't scoop up to it. They've got 7 cards in hand, so they shouldn't quit that easily. Okay, there's an Expedite. So we can go in for open the armory. And we could go for Sunforger actually, couldn't we? But we have Expedite in hand that I want to cast. Yeah, I think I'd just go for the Feast and Famine here because it's ramp, and that's one thing we're lacking in these colours. Sunforger is really for the late game. Now, luckily we do have a red land that we can untap to get Expedite going. This will force our opponent to discard a card, and they are up to 11 points of commander damage. If we can get into a cantrip spell that gives Feather another bit of power, then what we could do, let's see if we can Expedite here. Don't feel too worried about holding up the Boros Charm. They discarded a Shardless Agent, by the way. Expedite will draw us. Okay, Skull Clamp is another piece of power, so let's go for that. And this means we win next turn because Feather will be swinging in for 6 points of damage. With Double Strike means 12. And that means we take our opponent up to 23 points of commander damage. We get Expedite back into our hand. Cannot use it on our opponent's turn, unfortunately. If we had red mana, we could cast this on our opponent's turn and get it back into our hand during our opponent's end step, ready for us to cast again during our turn. It's what makes Feather so value-centric. And our opponent's gone in for a Cultivate there. And just getting some ramp going. That is going to be way too slow for them. I want a Birds of Paradise, but we have protection from green, so this thing won't be able to block there. So all we need to do is swing in at our opponent. This is a 6/5, and in response to blockers, our opponent cannot block, but in response to blockers, we go in for the Boros Charm and hope our opponent doesn't have a Swan Song. I think Swan Song can counter instants, can't it? And there we go, we hit our opponent twice, get them to discard 2 cards, and we untap our lands twice there. 23 points of commander damage. Nice little Voltron game with Feather there. That was Feather the Redeemed, and we were a little bit too quick this time for Yidris. Maelstrom Wielder typically likes to drag the game out a little bit longer than turn 6. Managed to wrap that up quite quickly. Hope you all enjoyed it. I'm tribalkai on the EDH channel. Thank you for watching.